Well, good morning from London, but it's much, much later in Hong Kong, where our guest Carson Wen is dialing in. And in the background, you'll be seeing, I think, the sunset behind Carson at his offices. Now, today is about chopstick culture and the success of East Asian economies. And the chopstick, the utensil, which 1.8 billion people in East Asia use, actually, Carson contends, embodies their culture and will, in many ways, explain the success of East Asian economies. Because we frequently forget that there's been, in fact, an Asian boom over the last half century across a variety of Asian, both East and Southeast Asian countries. And Carson's here to explain that to us. Now, you'll know me, I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Xi'an, and I can really only do webinars such as today's thanks to the generosity, tolerance, and wide interests of our many sponsors, who do range in many cases across East Asia and Southeast Asia. And we're delighted that today we're going to try a synthesis here of cuisine, culture, and commerce. Now, the format today is going to follow a fairly traditional one that people within the FS Club are comfortable with, which is that I'll get out of the way as quickly as I can so that you can hear from Carson. Carson will be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have about 20 minutes of questions and answers. So it should be good fun. 3 points, if I may. One, yes, the slides are available. In fact, they're already available on the website. Secondly, this recording will be going up in approximately 2 working days. So it should be up midday GMT on Wednesday. And then finally, how do you participate? Well, the easiest way to participate is to type into the GoToWebinar question and answer facility, because I'm here with you. I'm not on Signal, or I'm not watching Twitter accounts or answering emails. So feed those in, and your questions and answers will be fed into that conversation that we'll be having with Carson at 10:25. All of your emails with your all of your questions with your emails attached will be sent to Carson. So if you have a question of detail or would like to contact him, just type it in and we'll make sure that he gets it. Now, just before we kick off, we thought we'd give you a bit of a quiz because Carson is going to talk about 4 different types of chopsticks. So very quickly, we have our first poll: which culture uses chopsticks that have squared or rounded sides with blunt, flat tips? Is it Japan, Korea, Vietnam, or China? Now we're going to do 4 very, very quick ones. So I'm just waiting for most of you to have voted. Carson, our audience is very quick and very opinionated. In fact, well over half have voted. Just going to leave that open for another second or two. And now we'll display the results of that one. So which culture uses it? Well, China seems to have won out, but it's a fairly even split. Peter's now going to reveal the answer. Ta-da, and it was in fact China. So FS Club wins, but we'll see if they can do better on the next 3, which ought to be easy. So which culture uses chopsticks that are longer than most with blunt, flat tips? Is it, again, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, or China? Bringing those responses in. As ever, a quick audience, well over half have voted. Just leave it open a few seconds longer. And Peter, how are we doing out there? Okay, so the answer was Japan, with Vietnam following second. Do you want to reveal the answer? It was actually Vietnam. So not quite as good. All right, well, it's going to get easier from here. Third one: which culture uses chopsticks that are medium length with flat rectangular tips? Leaving aside the Japan's misspelling there, is it Japan, Korea, Vietnam, or China? Great. Okay, and we'll now reveal the answer to that one. And here, everybody believes it's Japan's. And what's the answer, Peter?
I think China.
Korea.
I see.
Good. And then the final one. This one, I hope everybody gets this one right. So which one uses shorter chopsticks with fine tips? Japan, Korea, Vietnam, or China? Here we go, and we'll display the result. And we still have a few holdouts, but we got there in the end. Japan, 86%, and yes, the answer is Japan.
Yeah.
So well done, audience. It's a good training course here, And as you can see, there really are cultural differences even in utensils. So with no more ado, if I may, Carson, the floor is very much yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the introduction and for the quiz. I got 2 of the questions right, and the rest were wrong. So that's much for me to learn about the chopsticks. Can I have the slides? And then I'll go into. Again, thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Here are the chopsticks that we all saw on the quiz. There are over 2 billion, 1.8 to 2 billion people in East Asia that use the chopsticks for their food. And if we look at the map of GDP per capita, which I think is a good indication of the standard of living, this is what the Asian map looks like. And then I'll go to the next map, which covers the countries with the highest GDPs in Asia. The 6 countries that have the highest GDP in Asia are in the pink map, except, and there's one more country that is not in the pink map, but having a fairly low GDP per capita, and that's Vietnam. But then I can explain why that is the case. Number one, Vietnam was at war between 1961 to 1975. And that was the time when the Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea were racing very quickly to become the four little dragons in Asia. But Vietnam was still at war then. And not to mention that something like 20 million gallons of Agent Orange were spread over about 3.1 hectares of Vietnamese forest. And so about 4 million South Vietnamese were exposed, and about 3 million got ill. So that may explain why Vietnam has not been able to make it to the top countries in terms of GDP per capita, but it's growing at a speed of about 10%, just about south of 10% per annum until the pandemic comes. And for 2020, first year of the pandemic, it was like 2.9%, which is not too bad, but I'm sure it will grow very quickly as a chopstick country. And what does the use of chopstick involve? It involves sharing, mutual respect, self-discipline, punctuality, fraternity, caring about the people that you share the table with, and decorum and a proper sense of shame for not going to the table clean. So people who are taken ill do not join the dinner table, they eat alone. So what it means is that the interests of the collective is more important than that of the self, which is to enjoy the meal. Those coincide with what are the values that I mentioned below, the Confucian value. So let me go very quickly into Confucian value and Confucius. Confucius, the leading philosophy in the chopstick using parts of East Asia, as I mentioned, China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and places like Singapore, is Confucianism. So Confucius was a Chinese philosopher and politician in the spring and autumn period of Chinese history. That's about 5 centuries before Christ. And that was a time when there was a lot of blossoming of different schools of thought, etc., which is something like the classical period of ancient Greece, when so many different philosophies were expounded. I will go to that later. But Confucianism itself emphasizes personal and government morality or ethics, correctness of relationships, kindness, righteousness, justice, dutifulness, and filial piety. In today's words, doing the right thing. And it's a very structured society. A Confucian society is very structured, built upon what they call the 5 relationships, that between the ruler and subject, the father and son, husband and wife, brothers and sisters, and friends and friends. And when everyone in such a very structured society play their respective roles, and are at ease with himself or herself, then there will be peace and harmony in society. So the pursuit of Confucianism is good government, social stability. And the Confucius was credited with editing many, in fact, 13 classics, but there were 5 that are the most important. We call Wu Jing, the 5 books: the Book of Changes, Book of History, the Book of Poetry, the Book of Rites, and the Spring and Summer Annals. And following the Spring and Summer period, there was this period called the period of the Warring States, which is about 479 to 221 BC. And the Greek sage there during that time is Mencius, and he added wisdom as an essential quality of the ideal gentleman, or 君子 in Chinese. So wisdom is added to the compassion, the righteousness, and the courtesy. Now you have wisdom. And then during the Han Dynasty, when Confucianism first became the ruling ideology, a philosopher, Dong Shangwu, added trust or xin to the other basic virtues. So now you have the 5 virtues, that of compassion, ren, righteousness, yi, ritual or courtesy, li, wisdom, zhi, and then the xin. Those become the 5 virtues that the gentleman should have and the ruler must have. So in the Confucian tradition, the ideal gentleman or 君子 is someone who is refined, who embodies benevolence, maintains tradition, maintains filial piety towards his ancestors and family. It's a society that looks for stability, and the ruler must set a good example for his people, and in turn the people should respect the ruler and be loyal to him. So loyalty is a matter of must in a Confucian society, and that must is gained by the ruler practicing the 5 virtues. And a stable society can only be achieved when everyone accepts the places in society, fulfills the duties while addressing his own desires. Confucianism does not ask for sacrifice. It asks that everyone do their respective role in society, doing the right thing. So the goals of a Confucian society is having a good ruler that practices the 5 virtues. A stable society is attained when the people of that society is at ease with themselves and with each other. And when that is the case, they accept the positions in society. And when that is achieved, then there will be stability and peace. So the dynastic cycle would be, you have a good ruler, then you have a stable society, and the 5 relationships are in balance, and everyone follows the rulers in his virtuous footsteps. And if those in high positions are moral, then those in lower position will mimic that virtue, and soon the whole society will be ethical from bottom to top. And that is the Confucianism as such relies on the optimistic belief that humans are naturally compassionate and value filial piety, so they generally desire to aid others and the community. So a good ruler, according to Confucius, is virtuous, wise, humane. He cares for his subjects, even if they are peasants. And Confucius said, you may rob the 3 armies of the commander, but you cannot deny even the humblest peasant of his opinion, and thus instilling the importance of allowing the people to have the ears of the government. And in otherwise, the mandate of heaven may be lost. If a ruler does not listen to his people and does not act virtuously, then the mandate of heaven will be lost, and there would then be a change of dynasties. And I mentioned Mencius earlier. Mencius is even more aggressive in terms of advocating benevolent governance, and that he said, 民为亲，民为贵，权为轻, that the ruler, the ordinary citizen is more weighty than the ruler, and power cometh from the people. 正在得民, and is very much against harsh government. So Mengzi even proposed that each peasant must be given an adequate piece of land, and that the working time must not be abused. He also advocated life sentences and minimum taxation. So, you know, in many ways, he is sort of a believer in democracy. Confucius also talked about listening to the people, and so free. You know, what you don't, democracy is a term used as far back as Confucius and Mencius. One word that I did not find in the writings of Confucius, Mencius, and the Confucian scripts are the word freedom. For whatever reason, the word freedom has not appeared in old Chinese philosophy, but democracy is very much part of it. And during the period of warring states, again, there were many schools of thought that were advocated, and that was that phenomenon was described as 100. I unfortunately have one part of my screen covered, so I'm not seeing most of it. And among the many philosophies that were being advocated during that period, those of the Confucianism, the legalists, and the Taoists. The legalists were the philosophy that was used during the Emperor Qin. Emperor Qin was the first emperor that united China, and he went so far as to fix the gauge of the wheels of the chariots and carts within the empire, standardize the written Chinese language. So it's the emperor that actually put together Chinese civilization as what it is today. No, it's. Can I see the screens again?
We've got the screen.
Yeah, now I can see the screen. The legalists, which is the philosophy used by Emperor Qin, practiced rule by harsh laws and heavy sentences. So there was a time when the legalists were in the ruling philosophy, and Emperor Qin was rather ruthless, but he did put China as one country for the first time after many centuries of the spring and autumn period and the period of the warring states, and unified the language. And so when then during the intervening period until Emperor Han Wudi was one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history, around the year 200 years BC, that was a time of Han Wudi. But before him, there was a combination of Yi Qing, Taoists, and Zhuangzi. These were the more, what should I say? The Chinese call them Yunxue. These are the more non-interventionist kind of philosophies, believing in nature, believing in minimal approach of governance, that the government should let everyone do their own thing, and that that is how the world will be balanced. In a way, that may be like more of the environmentalist beliefs today. Is a more green world, and it's also more like Adam Smith, let people do their own thing. But came Han Wudi, who was a very strong ruler. He then adopted Confucianism with its emphasis on duty, loyalty, stability. And since then, Confucianism has been the governing philosophy in China until the Imperial China was, there was the Republic of China began in 1912, and the sort of new Confucianism hold on the Chinese bureaucracy then stopped. And back in 1919, when the very famous May 4th movement happened, the intellectuals then say, no more Confucianism, let's yearn for democracy and science. And during the Cultural Revolution, Confucianism and everything that manifested became the targets of the Red Guards for destruction. Neo-Confucianism is what happened during the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties, were a period when Neo-Confucianism, under the philosopher Zhu Xi and many of his contemporaries and those behind him, Neo-Confucianism looks back to the period of Confucius and try to interpret it in their own ways. And in the Song dynasty, it was rather romantic, and in the Ming dynasty as well. And in the Qing dynasty, then it became there was a reversion back to the classical texts and trying to go back to the words of Confucius in the Analects, in the five books, to see what the old sages actually said, rather than the romantic kind of interpretations under Neo-Confucianism. But Neo-Confucianism became adopted in Korea around the 10th century, and became part of the national civil service examinations in Korea. And so in Korea, Neo-Confucianism has been very much a part of the Korean learning, Korean culture, and same in Japan. Around Tang Dynasty, around the 7th to 9th century, Confucianism went to Japan. And for example, in the city of Nara, for example, is actually quite a copy of Chang'an, the then capital in China. And in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, Confucianism was later introduced into Vietnam in 111 BC. And the court examinations, become bureaucrats. You go through the court examinations, and those are Confucian texts. And the Confucianism in Singapore, its influence can be best illustrated by what Lee Kuan Yew himself said. My experience in governing Singapore, especially the difficult early days from 1959 to 1969, convinced me that we would not have surmounted our difficulties and setbacks if a large part of the population of Singapore were not imbued with Confucian values. The people had a group cohesion and a pragmatic approach to government and to the problems in society. Confucianist traditions have made Chinese Singaporeans revere scholarship and academic excellence, and also respect officials when they are chosen on the basis of their scholarship. Meritocracy is very much part of what Confucianism teaches, and meritocracy, of course, is very much part of the Singapore culture, and what part of what Lee Kuan Yew has in the founding of Singapore. And so in this very short presentation, I try to introduce the philosophical and cultural underpinnings of the chopstick using countries of East Asia, which, with the exception of Vietnam, ranked the top 6 in Asia in GDP per capita, which would be a fair measure of the economic well-being and standard of living of its people. The overriding interests of the collective, the respect for even the humblest member of society, compassion for others, importance of doing the right thing, loyalty to one's country, quest for self-cultivation, very much part of the Neo-Confucian culture, primacy of the middle way, be neither too left or too right, try to stay in the middle, pursuit of harmony, filial piety, all these contribute to relatively stable environment of the East Asian chopstick countries, which is which underlines the economic success of the East Asian countries. So my 20 minutes for doing the presentation is over. I'll pass this back to Michael, our chairman.
Carson, that was fantastic. What a canter through so much content. That was excellent.
Thank you for
Got
giving me time.
A few questions here, but folks, please do questions, comments to Carson, but just to get cracking. Carson, Bob McDowell, who's a resident out in the Channel Islands, suggests that the structural and sharing aspects of the societies which you outline place Asia at an advantage when addressing the social, financial, and economic aspects of aging, with more success than the West. What do you think of that? Is that
Yes.
true?
It is true in the sense that, number one, filial piety is a very central Confucian value, that you do cherish your ancestors, your parents, and supporting the parents is part of the duties of someone in a Confucian society, and therefore there's less need for society to support. That is the children that will support the elders, given financial resources, and therefore that's less reliance on society for providing that economic protection.
Okay. Bruno Azena asks, how much of Confucianism and the better for the collective approach still plays a role in today's business culture in East and Southeast Asia? This would contend as an opposite to the more individual or supposedly aggressive way of doing business in, for example, American culture. But is that true? I could certainly point to a lot of people whose experiences in Asia in business culture have been fairly aggressive.
Well, in China, in Japan, in Korea, in Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, I think corporates are still rather structured, and people do take instructions from upstairs, whereas probably in Silicon Valley or in more Western innovative societies, etc., then everyone have their own say. So yes, I think it's not just in China, but across East Asia, across the chopstick eating countries, then people had what do you call it? Is a very structured corporate direction system, and it goes only one way, from up to down. But then there's a lot, as you see in Confucianism, everyone should have the ears of the upstairs, and therefore ideas would be sought, but orders are given from upside to downside.
Okay.
I think that's how Japanese, Korean, Chinese SOEs and Singaporean companies all probably operate in that way.
Okay. Now, Stephen Murgatroyd has a question for you. His understanding is that the concept of a contract was alien to East Asia until doing business with the West, and this is why establishing trust takes longer. Is there truth in that?
Yes, because in the Confucian culture, you say my word is my bond. And therefore, if you trust someone with his words, there's no need to write it down. And in fact, in the year 200 years before Christ, the legalists were already the ruling ideology. So law is something that has been in China for over 2,000 some years. But there are some, so China has one of the earliest laws in the world. But on the other hand, there are also defects in the Chinese legal system in that we did not distinguish between criminal and civil sort of rights and obligations, etc. For example, in the West, for example, things like extramarital affairs would be something that is a civil matrimonial case, but in China you go to jail for that. So it becomes a criminal offense in the old imperial China. So there's not a lot of distinction between what is a civil right or civil obligation and a criminal obligation. So that is one part of Chinese law that needed to be changed. But let me tell you a story. The old Qing emperor, I think during the 1880s or 1890s, asked someone called Wu Tingfang, who was the first Chinese barrister. Mr. Wu, the late Mr. Wu, went to Britain to learn his law, went back to Hong Kong to become a barrister. He was also the first Hong Kong Chinese to join the legislative chambers when everyone else was British. So he was the first Chinese justice of the peace in Hong Kong, etc. And then the Manchu dynasty asked him to become the law reform commissioner. So he went to Europe and went to Germany, went to France, went to the UK, came back to China, went to Japan, and came back to China and recommended. One would have thought he would have recommended adoption of the common law, since it's a British trained barrister. No, he recommended the use of continental civil law, more or less like the Napoleonic codes for China, which is why China then adopted the 6 laws or the 6 codes, which were essentially civil law codes. And those actually came to China less from Germany or France, but from Japan. Because during that time, quite a lot of, for whatever reason, there are some scholars, Chinese legal scholars, that went to Japan and learned European civil law through the Japanese civil law system. So what they took back to China were actually Japanese civil codes and criminal codes. And those went into the Qing laws. That then became the modern laws in China and persisted until the Republican Revolution in 1912. And the Republicans made some laws, but a lot of it was still based on the 6 codes that were translated from the Japanese codes that were more or less born out of European, Germanic, French origins. So that's how so this barrister of a law reform commissioner actually recommended China to use the European civil codes for its modern law rather than British common law. But I can understand, because common law based on case law, and it's very difficult to use British case law for China when the cultural norms are very different. So probably rightly, he recommended the adoption of European civil codes or the coming through Japan.
Carson, in preparation for this, I had a little look at some of the things, for example, Xi Jinping has said.
Yes.
And it was back in 2014, there was a conference on building confidence across Asia on security issues, terrorism, transnational crime, cyber. And he said that cooperative security means promoting the security of both individual countries and the region as a whole through dialogue and cooperation. And he used an old proverb: strength does not come from the muscle of the arms, but from the unison of the heart. And Clive Bullen is curious in that vein, is there a chance of the Asian countries helping out somehow to stop the war in Ukraine, given the wrongs that are happening there?
I don't know if Russia or Ukraine or NATO would listen. I do not think that the Chinese have much say on what either. China is quite close to Ukraine, is quite close to Russia as well. So both countries are friendly to China. So that makes it very difficult. And the Chinese position has always been, if I hear the foreign ministry, has always been to ask both countries, please stop war, go to negotiate. We'll try to mediate, or the Chinese always believes that controversies or differences in opinion could be mediated. So the Chinese has been trying to push for mediation rather than telling either side, both of whom are friends, what to do.
Okay. Colin Coulson Thomas has an interesting question, which I'll pick up in my closing remarks as well, I think. But what does Confucius tell us about our relationship with the natural world?
Not enough. The Taoists are very much like Green. The Taoist believes in man's harmony with nature is very important. Confucius did not say much about that, but Confucius certainly would not ask people to abuse nature because that's against the heaven. I mean, everything in the Confucian culture and the power to rule comes from mandate from heaven, and heaven certainly wouldn't want the earth to be spoiled, to be abused. So I do not believe that Confucius would be against a green world, but I have not seen a lot of his writings relating to how to protect the environment. The Taoists certainly will be within that category.
Yeah. Douglas Anders has a comment and a question which I think is fascinating. The current Chinese regime, especially since Xi Jinping's accession, has tried to marry Marxism and Confucianism, and in fact, I would contend as well, capitalism. But given the current crises affecting the country, so the bottleneck it seems to have gotten into with COVID and some of the economic consequences of that, do you think that there's any chance that Xi and the party might lose the mandate of heaven? Does effectively the mandate of heaven depend on success?
In fact, the Chinese have been quite successful in containing COVID. You remember Wuhan? Wuhan happened, and then there were like 8,000 some deaths, and then it was contained after very rigorous efforts. And then China became fairly COVID-free until recently in Shanghai. Between Wuhan and Shanghai, there were like on good days, double-digit infections, on bad days, triple-digit infections per day across a very large country. Until Shanghai, and before then in Harbin, where there may be four-figure, Shanghai, there were five-figure daily infection numbers for like 2-3 weeks. Now it's down again. So I think the Chinese government has been quite effective in containing the spread of COVID. I think a recent poll, I think by Pew, by Western, by Dew, I think it's some American research lab find that something like 98% support from the Chinese people for the present regime. And I, living in Hong Kong and knowing China quite well, I believe that is the case as well. The country has managed to continue to grow despite pandemic and despite very hostile geopolitical circumstances, and the civil unrest in Hong Kong 2019 has, instead of spreading over into mainland China, united the people on mainland China more, because they see, well, if a society is sort of like rather loose in governance, things may go upside down. And actually the the geopolitics actually help the regime and the president to have a more unified country behind him rather than the other way around. And I very much believe that to be the case. Knowing what I do about the country, although I can't go in, but I can't go in because of the pandemic and the lockdown. But I do read Chinese social media on a daily basis, and that's the kind of situation that I believe is the case.
And just a pointer to the audience and Douglas's comment, Henry Tillman points out that 2 Chinese mRNA vaccines are now functional and rolling out later this year and early next. So thank you, Henry. Just to close, really 2 things, if I might, Carson. We had a friend of ours on, Jim Briding, who spoke about the small 8 nations, as he called them, Ireland, Denmark, Switzerland, etc. And he contended that they got 4 things right. They got education right, they got healthcare right, they got the environment right, and they got the elderly and disadvantaged right. Those are all 4 long-term issues. And clearly, Confucianism is directed at that long-term stability of relationships. But I think one might argue that the cultures have definitely got education, or at least one version of education, very strong. But do they really shine in the other 3 areas of the environment, healthcare, and care for the elderly and disadvantaged?
Yes, Chinese healthcare is, everyone is taken care of free. Of course, there's still a lot more to improve on the national health system, but the state does take care of everyone. There are private hospitals, but otherwise people do go from hospitals to clinics in districts, etc. I've used those from time to time. Environment, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I spent 15 years sitting in the Chinese National Parliament representing Hong Kong. And one of the highest priorities has always been the environment. It has not been sort of, broadcasted worldwide, but for the Chinese, making sure that the environment is protected has been of the highest policy agenda in China since 20-some years ago when I was in the National Parliament. So I must say that it is something that is very high on the Chinese agenda, but it's 1.4 billion people, very crowded. So and the world's largest manufacturing country. So there's a lot of industries and energy being used, etc., etc. So, but it is very much in the Chinese consciousness. And Xi Jinping, the president, has always told the Chinese people, Jing Shan, Ying Shan, what it says is the green hills, the green water, is the hills, gold mountains, silver mountains. Treasure them because they are precious. The blue seas, the blue skies, the green lakes, clean rivers. These are the gold hills and silver hills. You should take care of them. So one is environment, the other is public health, and the other one, Michael, if I may be reminded, what's the other item?
No, it's that kind of elderly and disadvantaged was the last one there, but yeah.
Yeah, but the elderly are taken care of by the family, but there's also the national pension. So the national pension system is, and also the social security system has been around for a long time. So the everyone is given the minimum. Everyone has the minimum. I can't remember how much it is. May not be a large sum, but there's social insurance for everyone that any Chinese citizen is entitled to that.
Carson, sadly, we've run to the end of time. I mean, and you've been so kind to try and compress 3,000 years of thinking into 20 minutes, which is unfair, but hopefully it's a lead for people to dig a little bit further. But just a final question, short if I can, and in a way, Bruno Zane, Bob McDowell, and Henry Price have all got this one in mind. What one piece of advice would you give to people from the fork countries so that they can work better with the chopstick countries?
I think mutual understanding and respect. The Chinese have not done well in explaining to our friends in other countries, different civilizations, the Western civilization, the Islamic civilization, other civilizations, about what our value system is. And today is one small try by me to try to explain how the not just China, but the chopstick using countries, what the basic philosophies are. And that's really very much both in Confucius and in Taoism. Taoism believes in life, you're kind of preordained. You do the best you can, but and that try to be respectful of others, try to be respectful of the environment, do the right thing, and you'll be taken care of. That's kind of, and it's always about the collective. It's not an invention of the Chinese Communist Party. Since Confucius, the East Asian people have always looked at the interests of the collective as being more important than the interests of the individual. You look at the Japanese, the Koreans, the Chinese, the Singaporeans, the people in Hong Kong, etc. We wear masks before it became mandatory. I mean, these are voluntary, and people do that to protect themselves. But you ask everyone, they say they want to protect society from themselves as well. The TV will interview people, what do you want to do? They say they want to protect society from the COVID. So that's very much part of the consciousness of the people. And I think that is what the chopstick countries believe in, that the collective is more important than the self.
Well, there we have it, folks. The collective is more important than yourself. And as ever, in so many things in social relationships, tolerance and respect for others goes a long way. And thank you so much for reminding of those eternal truths, Carson. I've got 3 quick rounds of thanks, if I may. Firstly, to our sponsors, you can see before you, who exhibit a lot of tolerance and respect for the various views that we're able to provide. Secondly, if I may, I'd like to thank our audience, and you can see here some of the things that are forthcoming. I would, as ever, suggest that you consult the website because there's a lot happening, but in fact, next week we will be launching our Smart Centers Index 5. But most importantly, I need to thank our speaker. Now, many of you on FS Club know that we have difficulty with the technology of applause, and I frequently use my Korean karmic clapper, but I can't imagine a better day than today in terms of respecting other cultures to use this device. And to thank you, Carson, for a wonderful introduction to and sharing of cultural differences, but mutual respect and tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the time. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to my friends who listen to me. Thank you very much.